I'm just kidding. But before I jump into the series, just let me just say right off the bat, the goal, the point of us talking about in the series Be Rich is not to make you feel guilty. It's not to pressure you to give money or anything like that. So I just want to right off the bat before we start, just take the pressure off. This is not going to be something arm twisting. We're not going to play in the arms of the angels and show videos of something sad. But I do want to have us look at what the Bible has to say about finances and about money this morning. And so I think that as we look into this for the next few weeks, we're going to discover that a lot of what Jesus had to say about money, a lot of what the Bible had to say about money is actually just really great, true advice. And so as we jump into this, I don't think any of you guys would debate with me on this, but the American dream is to get rich, right? Like the American dream, if you were to ask a bunch of people on the street, like what does that look like? It looks like some variety of getting rich. And if I asked you today to raise your hands, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but if I were, I'd be like, how many of you would like to get rich? We would all probably say, yeah, that sounds good. Now, I know some of you are a little contrarian, and you're thinking, no, John, not me. I don't want to be rich. I wouldn't want to have that pressure, or I wouldn't want to have the burden of that. I wouldn't want all the headache that would bring. And so I'll give you that, but then I'll ask a follow-up question. So if your boss came to you tomorrow morning at work, on Monday morning, and said, hey, I think you deserve a raise, you'd turn it down then, right? No, you wouldn't. Most of us would be like, yes, that's not bad news. That's great news. All of us would like to earn a little bit more money. And so, most of us, we don't want to be so rich that like we're famous and you can't go out and have dinner with your family, or that you can't go anywhere without people hitting you up for money. But none of us would say no to a little bit extra, would we? None of us would turn down a promotion. None of us would do that. Now, let me ask you another question. So we start with how many of us would like to get rich? I'm just going to assume all of us are like, yeah, that sounds nice. How many of you feel like you're already rich? You believe you're already rich, okay? And so some of us, some of you guys raise your hands. Some of us are probably thinking, no, I don't feel like I am rich. And that's because rich is a moving target, isn't it? With inflations and rising costs, it changes what it means to be rich. I mean, if you looked at, what any of us are making right now with our jobs and rewind the clock 20 years, we'd be like, wow, we're doing really awesome from 20 years ago, but we know inflation changes all that. But it's also about how we define rich. Like none of us would say we're rich compared to pick your celebrity of choice. None of us would say we're rich compared to the person we know that lives in a bigger house, a fancier neighborhood, has a nicer car. I'm not rich compared to my boss's boss. The problem with the American dream of wanting to get rich is how much extra do you need to call yourself rich? How much extra is enough to say, well, now I'm wealthy? And the problem is it's all about your perspective and all about who you're looking at. And so when I was a kid, okay, way back in like late 80s, early 90s, so I'm still like elementary school age. My dad, was pastor of church, so like we didn't make a ton of money. We lived in the church parsonage, but my dad was an early adopter of home computing. Okay, so you got to think back. This is late '80s, early '90s, somewhere in that time frame. My dad had already been on using computers, and this is I got to paint the picture for you because some of you guys, like my kids, you can't even imagine this. This is a world literally before the internet. Like the internet had been invented, but it wasn't something that was in anyone's home. It certainly wasn't in many businesses. At this point in time, you owned a computer to do some really basic things, like print words on a page. You might use a computer to play a really, really, really basic video game. I mean, we're talking like X's and O's and green on a black screen basic. And so back in this day, I'm a kid. My dad had recently upgraded, to a new computer, and he let me have the old one, okay? And so if you know anything about old computers, this will tell you everything you need to know. It ran on what is called the DOS operating system, Okay, this is before Windows, before, Mac OS, any of that kind of stuff. So to use this computer to run any kind of program or application, you had to know exactly what to type into the command prompt. Like if you misspelled it by a word, the computer said that's an invalid command, and just flashing cursor. And so really, really basic. But my friend Steve was over one day, and we were hanging out, and we were in my room, and I had this computer in my room that I basically did almost nothing with because you could play 2 really boring games on it. The Atari was better. And so I had the computer sitting in my room that my dad let me hang on to. And my friend Steve, he said, wow. He's like, you guys have 2 computers? Are you guys rich? Which was puzzling to me. Because if you had asked me, out of me and my friend Steve, which one of us was from a rich family, it was definitely Steve. He lived in a large house that had big columns on the front, which reminded me of the house on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Okay, they owned an in-ground swimming pool and a hot tub. His dad owned a bunch of businesses, and by my estimation, he was actually the rich one. But because we had 2 computers, and my friend Steve saw that as a very expensive item, which I'm sure it was, he didn't get that one of these computers was older than dirt and you couldn't do anything on it. To him, that was rich. And that is the problem and the funny thing about defining rich. It's all about which direction I'm looking. Because we can always find someone with more extra than us. That's not hard to do. But how often do we define ourselves by people who have less extra than us? And so while most of us probably wouldn't go around and answer the question, yes, I am rich financially. We might say I'm rich and all the things that matter in relationships, but I'm talking about finances this morning. Most of us would not say, yeah, I'm wealthy, I'm rich. But rich is always somebody else, right? Rich is always, I'm looking at someone else and their life and their standard of living. And even though most of us are probably making more money now in our current jobs than we ever have before in our lives, we are, whether we want to accept the reality or not, by just a basic, fundamental definition, we're all financially rich. You say, John, I don't know what you're talking about. But I make minimum wage. I'm just barely making ends meet. I don't know what you're talking about. There's no way that I am rich. Well, the average income in the world that we live in is $9,733 per year. That's what the average, the median income level across the world globally is. So if you were to ask, any person in the world what the average living wage is, that's what it is across the world. And so while I may not consider myself rich when I'm comparing myself to other Americans, I am rich compared to the vast majority of the world. Because they're living on average of $9,700 a year. Average household income across the world is $12,000 a year. To put that in perspective, if you only work making the minimum wage in the state of Maryland, which I know is higher than PA and West Virginia, that puts you at $31,000 a year, roughly 3 times the global average. Minimum wage in Maryland puts you at 3 times the global wage. And so this series, we're going to start off talking about the difference between getting rich and being rich. Now, my goal this morning is not to make you feel bad or guilty that you live in America and that we have a more comfortable standard of living than most of the world. It's not to say that money is evil and the things that you have that are nice, you shouldn't have them and shouldn't want them. But I do want us to pay attention to what the Bible has to say about riches. And contrary to what some people may think or some people say, the Bible never in anywhere it says that being rich is an evil thing to be. The Bible never says that you shouldn't have riches, you shouldn't have wealth. The Bible never actually says that money is evil. People often misquote a verse about that. We'll get into that one later. But the Bible does have a lot to say about what we should do if we find ourselves in the position of having extra. And this morning, it's my hope and my goal to help all of us accept the reality that no matter what your situation is financially, most of us, probably all of us, have some extra. And so we're going to look at, we're going to build a series around a passage in 1 Timothy chapter 6, and it says this starting in verse 17. This is Paul talking to his protege, Timothy. He says this, Teach those who are rich in this world. This is us. We eat and live indoors. We own a car. Some of us 2 cars. Some of us 3 cars. Some of us have a house just for our car to keep it out of the weather and out of the elements. You know, if you're making minimum wage, you're at 3 times the salary of the average person in the world. So those of us who are rich, this is talking to us. Teach them not to be proud and not to trust in their money, which is so unreliable. Their trust should be in God, who richly gives us all we need for our enjoyment. So Paul lays out a couple of rich people problems. Okay, these are the kind of problems that we have. The first one he lays out is pride. He's like, when you have more than you need, when you have more than enough, you can begin to say to yourself, I have all this stuff because I have earned it. I have what I have because I've worked hard, and we may not say it this directly, but sometimes we see, you know, someone standing on a street corner with a sign asking for a handout, and we think to themselves, well, if you would work as hard as I would work, you wouldn't be in that situation. If you were as smart as I were, you would be able to have what I have. And having riches, no matter how little rich we are or how big rich we are, it can distort our reality, our perception. And isn't that the thing that rubs us the wrong way about wealthy celebrities, is the distorted reality of their own self-importance? You know, you see this on an interview with somebody. Maybe it's a pro athlete that rubs you the wrong way. Maybe it's an actor. Maybe it's a politician. Maybe it's, you know, someone who owns, you know, a Fortune 500 company. And it just rubs you the wrong way because you can tell by the way they answer questions, by the way they act, by the way they treat other people, that somehow they think they are more important and have more value than the average person. And that's what Paul's talking about here. Is like, those who are rich in this world shouldn't put all their trust in money, shouldn't be prideful. And another problem with being as rich as all of us are is we can trick ourselves into trusting our money instead of trusting God. Now, let me put this in perspective. It's easy for me as a rich American, you know, to say I trust God for all my needs, when the reality is I don't know that I can ever genuinely think of a time where I was actually concerned about how I would feed my family that day. I mean, there have been many times when I haven't been able to feed my family what we felt like eating or what we wanted to eat. You know, there have been times when it's been really, really bare and really lean, and it was peanut butter and jellies all around. But that's not the same thing as saying, I don't know today if I can feed my children. I've never been in that situation. Maybe you have. But my point is, it makes it hard for us to really say we're trusting God for everything we need when we don't often have that kind of need presented to us. And so it says this. He says, tell them to use their money to do good. They should be rich in good works and generous to those in need. Paul draws this distinction between having riches and being rich. I'm just going to kind of put those verses together side by side for a second. Those who are rich should be rich. And so he goes on in this verse to talk about what being rich looks like. He says this, always being ready to share with others. Those who are rich should be rich, always being ready to share with others. And I got to be honest with you guys, there have been times in my life where I have seen a need, and you want to give to that need. You want to share. You want to do something. You want to get involved. But then I couldn't because I tell myself I don't have the money to share. I don't have the extra to give to this cause or to do this. I would love to give. I just don't have it. I would love to volunteer. My schedule just doesn't allow it. And I mean, let's be honest. Have you ever ran into someone, you're talking about life, whatever, how things are going, and they said to you, they say, hey, you know what? I really just don't know what I'm going to do with all my extra money. Like, I've been racking my brain trying to figure out what I'm going to do with the extra money that I don't need, no one ever says that, right? We always find ways to use our extra. And some of you may be kind of in your head pushing back on me hard saying, John, you're talking about extra, but I don't have it. But we do. All of us do. If you have ever gone on a vacation, then you've had extra. If you've ever taken your cell phone that worked perfectly fine and gone to a store and traded in for a newer one just because it had a nicer feature or you wanted a different color or whatever, we've had extra. If you've ever, paid someone to make a meal for you, I don't care if it was Taco Bell or steak dinner. You've paid someone else to prepare your food for you. That is the definition of extra. If you've ever taken your car that works just fine and traded it in to get a newer car, there was nothing wrong with your old car, or maybe there's a couple cosmetic things wrong with it. Maybe the power, feature, the bell and whistle, the whatever didn't work the way it used to, but the car itself still ran. That's the definition of extra. If you've ever decided to go shopping for the entertainment value, for the social value of it, not because you had to get something that you needed for a necessity, that is extra. Now, like I said at the beginning, I'm not trying to make you feel bad about any of that stuff, okay? Full disclosure, I upgraded a cell phone yesterday, okay? We purchased a new car recently. I'm not telling you any of that stuff is wrong or immoral or bad or you shouldn't do it. What I am saying, though, is we can't say, honestly, that we don't have extra in our lives. We can't honestly say that we're not rich. And the reason that we don't feel like we have extra is really, really hard to see in the mirror, and it's really, really hard to accept. The reason that you and I don't always feel like we have extra is because of greed. Like, hold on, John. Now you've gone too far. Like, I don't know, you're not throwing the greed word around on this. Let me define greed for you guys. Greed is the assumption that it's all for my consumption. Greed is the assumption that everything that's come my way, that every dollar I've gotten is supposed to be for me. And greed has nothing to do with how much money you or I have or don't have. It has everything to do with an assumption about money. The assumption that you can spend all your money or you can hoard and save it, but you're doing it all for yourself, for your family. And either way, we're making an assumption, assuming that every dollar that comes my way is meant for me to spend and to save on me. And Jesus said that's a faulty assumption. And he pointed at a completely different way to view our money. And he says this in Luke chapter 12. He said, beware, guard against every kind of greed. Now, let me just level with you. When I read these verses, when I'm talking these points, this steps on my toes a lot. But Jesus says there's different kinds of greed. So like when I think about greed, I think about like the Disney Scrooge McDuck, like sitting on a pile of gold inside of a vault the size of the Sears Tower, just hoarding, millions and millions and billions upon billions. But Jesus says there's different kinds of greed. It's not just some evil billionaire who's exploiting child labor to build an empire, but it also happens in more subtle ways that you or I can fall into. He says, beware against every kind of greed. And he goes on to say this, life is not measured by how much you own. Life is not measured by how much we own. And all of us, we hear those words, we're like, yeah, I know that to be true. And yet every message in our culture, every commercial, and honestly, a lot of times the things that motivate us financially come from this belief that actually, no, John, we do believe that sometimes life is measured by how much you own. When you ask someone who you haven't seen since high school, how things are going and what are they doing, what is the first thing usually people start talking about? A lot of times talk about what they're doing for work, how life is going, and some people that's a source of pride, and they're happy about it, and they can't wait to tell you about their vacation house they just got, or the boat they purchased, or whatever thing that's a status symbol that says, hey, guess what? I just want you to know, my life, it's measuring out pretty good right now. Like things are good. I've got some cool stuff going on. I'm making a lot of money, and so life is good. And the opposite is true as well. Like even if we've got a big compassionate heart and it's not this like look down on you kind of attitude, but it's like, oh yeah, no, we're struggling right now. We're barely making ends meet. We do often measure life by what we own. It's one of the first things that comes up even in casual conversation with people you don't know that well. And despite that being the primary message of our world, how much you have is not how life is measured. And see, money can add meaning to your life. There's no doubt about it. Life can be enjoyed more when you got more money. It's nice to not have to be feeling financial pressure all the time. The money can add meaning to your life, but it's not the meaning of your life. And if all this talk about money so far are making you nervous, you're like, John, where are you going with all this? It shouldn't. Because no one has ever regretted putting into practice what Jesus has to say about money. Not once. So I want to go back to what Paul said to Timothy. He said, those who are rich should be rich and always be ready to give. How do you and I practically commit to be people who are rich towards others, who are always ready to give? Well, it's all about what we do with our extra. And like I said, everything that you and I have that goes beyond meeting our basic needs, it is extra, okay? Like I know, and trust me, I consider our internet service a necessity in our life. But it's not actually. I mean, if I really had to, I could live without it. If I really had to, I don't have to have television. There's a lot of things that I could eliminate that would save our family a ton of money that I choose not to. But what we do with our extra is how we decide how we're going to be rich. And more specifically, pre-deciding what to do with my extra is how I am someone who is rich and always ready to give. And this is the only way I know to be rich on a consistent basis. It's being a percentage giver. Deciding at the very, very beginning, I'm going to take this percentage of the money that comes my way, and I'm going to give that. Pre-deciding what to do with my extra. This is the only way it happens. Because otherwise, what happens when you have extra money? It gets used somewhere. You spend it, you save it, you pay off a debt, you do something with that money, and we all know this to be true. If you don't decide where your money goes, it'll just go on its own, right? Have you ever, maybe gotten a little sloppy with tracking your expenses and whatnot, and you think your bank account, is at X spot, and you go and you check it, and you're shocked. Have you ever been shocked checking your bank balance? And you're like, where did the money go? Oh, have I been a victim of identity fraud? And then you start going through the transactions. You're like, oh no. A little bit there, a little bit there, a little bit there, a little bit there. Our extra just goes if we don't tell it where to go. And we're tempted to say, well, John, look, I don't have enough to be a percentage giver yet. But when I get that next job, when I earn just a little bit more, then I'll be able to afford to give on a percentage level. But right now, I don't, it's just not a possibility right now. Or once I get that next job, or once I pay off my car or the student loan, or once I get a raise, then I'll be able to give. And that is the consumption assumption at work in our lives. Thinking that I can't do it right now, but one day I will. The truth is, the more we have, the harder it is to give a percentage. It's just true. The more we have, the harder it is to give a percentage. So if you only make $500 a week and you've committed you're going to give away 10% of that, how much is that? $50. Okay? Yeah, not nothing to sneeze at, but I mean, I'll bet right now if any of us had to come up with $50 for a reason, we could find a way to do that. Now, if you make $5,000 in a week, what's 10% of that? $500. It gets harder to do this as you get more along financially. It doesn't get easier. It gets harder unless you build the habit early on. When you build the habit and do it early on, it's no big deal no matter what the number is. And if we have this thought that once I have a little more, then I'll be able to give. I want to share a story of Jesus' life that he evaluates giving completely different than you or I. Because let's be honest, if after today's offering, which by the way, we're not taking another offering today, so don't get nervous. The only one we've had is done. But if I were to go and look at the offering and Mike came to me, he's like, hey, you won't believe it. Somebody gave us $1,000. I'd be like, oh, that's amazing. That's wow, that's awesome. Now, I don't know that Mike might come to me with the same excitement. He's like, hey, I just want to let you know, someone gave $1. Someone gave $1. Isn't that exciting? I'd be like, yes, it is, Mike. Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you're pumped up about, people giving to the kingdom. I am too. That's great. But this is what Jesus said. Luke 12, verse 41. Jesus sat down near the collection box at the temple and watched as the crowds dropped in their money. How many rich people put in large amounts? It says many. Many rich people put in large amounts. Then a poor widow came and dropped in 2 small coins. So you got rich people, large amounts, small widow, 2 coins. Jesus is like, hey, disciples, you got to see this. Come here, check this out. He gathers his disciples to him and said, I tell you the truth. Did you see all those rich people dropping big money? That's awesome. We should celebrate that. No, that's not what he said. He said, I tell you the truth. This poor widow has given how much? More. Hold on, Jesus. I know you're the spiritual one, but, maybe you're a rabbi for a reason, not an accountant, because large amount and 2 coins, 2 coins is not more than large amount. Jesus is like, no, it is. He says he gave more than all the others who are making contributions. He says, for they gave tiny. She gave everything. They gave a tiny amount of their surplus. She gave everything she had to live on. Now, the point of the story, I got to be grateful to say, is not give everything you have away. That's not the point of the story. The point of this is it's not about how much you have. It's about what you do with what you have. It's not about how much you make. It's about what you do with what you have. It's about how you handle the resources, how you handle the extra you have. And the only way to do that is to commit to be a percentage giver. If you don't do that, if you don't commit, say, God, I'm committing right now. I'm going to begin every dollar that comes in, I'm giving 10% to you. Or you can start with a different percentage number. The Bible talks about a tithe. I'm not going to tell you what number to use. That's between you and God. But I am going to tell you, you need to find a number. Because until you do, the extra will always just slip away. It'll go away, and sometimes you wouldn't even know where it went away. You will eat the extra. Going out to eat. The extra will turn into an upgrade. The extra will turn into, let me bump this standard of living of mine just a little bit more. That extra will turn into a remodel or whatever. And again, I'm not telling you you shouldn't do those things and those things are wrong or evil. What I'm saying is, if we are serious about following Jesus, we've got to start taking his advice and inviting him into the area of our finances. And maybe you've experienced that tension before. Of feeling maybe called by God to do something and not being able to do it because the finances were a mess. I know I felt that before. You got God on one side and MasterCard on the other. Your heart and God is telling you, I want to give, I want to get involved with this thing. And then MasterCard's on the other side saying, yeah, but you have a big payment coming up. Or your school loan, or your car payment, or your mortgage, or whatever. And see, we don't think about financial things being spiritual things, but the truth is they are. Financial issues are spiritual issues because they reveal who's really in charge of my life. When I know I have to make that payment, and I don't have a choice, because if I don't make that payment, at some point someone's going to show up and take my stuff. I'm not in charge. Someone else is. And when an opportunity to give comes up, The consumption assumption, we'll just look at the bank balance and say, oh, I don't have it. I checked my bank account. I cannot give this today. I cannot help that cause. I cannot, help that give money to this or to that. Isn't that how you usually evaluate giving decisions? I mean, honestly, it's how I evaluate giving a decision. It's like, okay, John, can you give to this missions cause or whatever? I'll look at the bank account. I'll look at the budget and be like, yes, I can. No, I can't. It's just a very, very simple black and white decision. The money's there. I can say yes. The money's not there. I can say no. But the consumption assumption works differently when I'm making a decision about something that I want. I will get creative with my finances. I will get creative with my spending. I will get creative with borrowing in order to get something that I want, right? Like we will figure it out. And if I'm honest, I rarely put that kind of effort and energy in figuring out a way to give to something that God's put on my heart. And that's convicting. And the only way that you and I can break the power of greed in our life, which is at work in your life, it's at work in my life, whether I want to admit it or not. That assumption that everything that comes my way is meant to be for me, that all of the money I earn is supposed to be used at my discretion. That's an assumption that Jesus would say is wrong. And percentage giving is the only way to break the power of greed in our lives. It's the only way to be people who are rich towards others, who are always ready to give. And so this is where we're going to go with the series, okay? I just wanted to kind of lay out the basic, thought for you today, okay? So like I said, no offering today, no second special offering. We're not starting a building campaign. There's no big financial ask coming up. But what I do want you to think on and pray on is what it might look like to give God control of some of the extra in our lives. And so we're going to look more practically at this next week on how we actually do this, because I get it right now. Some of you are probably, if you're with me and you're tracking along, okay, John, I hear you, and I want to be obedient to God, and I want to do what God says with money, but I don't even know how it will be possible to give any percentage away right now. We are maxed out. Every dollar has a name. It's all, everything that's coming in is going out. So we're going to talk more about that, more specifically about it next week, on how we move from a place where everything's committed to a place where we give on a percentage way. And at the end of this series, I'm going to give you a heads up. I want to give us all an opportunity to give to someone in need. We're going to have an opportunity to be generous, to be rich. And I'm going to put a quick photo up on the screen for you guys. This is Ben and Gina Hansen and their family. And they're people that we know. And Ben was a graphic designer. And recently, he quit his job as a graphic designer. And him and his family are planning to move to a country. I'm not even supposed to tell you where, because it's actually not a place where it's okay to go and do gospel work. But they're going to a place that handles an enormous influx of refugees. And Ben told us the last time I talked to him, he's like, yeah, most of the people we'll meet, he's like, I'll be the first Christian they've ever met in their lives. And so they're preparing, they're raising money so that they can go where they felt like God led them. They've sold their house in Florida, and they're getting ready to go over there. And at the end of this series, I'm going to give us an opportunity to give to them. And just to let you know, as a church, we've already committed to support them on a regular basis. And Tilly and I have also committed to do this on a personal level. And I want to give all of us an opportunity to do this, because this is a way for us to give, to be rich towards someone who is at work meeting practical needs and spiritual needs all wrapped up in one. And so I just want to put that in the back of your mind. But I'm going to ask Mike to put a little music on as I close this in prayer, because here's the bottom line, guys. We, in our way of kind of looking at the world, as there are spiritual things and then there's worldly things. Okay, it's the worldly things don't have anything to do with the spiritual things, and vice versa. But the reality is, what we do with what we have is a deeply spiritual issue. And I cannot genuinely say I'm fully devoted to God if I haven't invited him into my finances, if I'm not taking some of what he has to say to heart about what I do with the money I have. And so this is all I've got for you as an action step for this week. This week, I want to challenge you to just begin to ask God what it might look like to invite him into your financial decisions. Okay? I'm not going to tell you you need to come back next Sunday ready to give 10% of every dollar that comes in. I'm not going to tell you need to be ready to give to the Hanson family and help them. Look, these are decisions that you have to make. And you have to be convinced that this is the right thing for you to do, because if you're not convinced, it'll never last. The last thing I want to do, especially given the history of church and finances in America, the last thing I want to do is make you feel like I'm twisting your arm, making you feel guilty to do something you really don't feel like doing, don't want to do, but you're like, well, I guess I have to, because the pastor says if I don't, give to God, I'm like, pawn of Satan or something like that. Not going to do that. But what I am asking you to do this week is to genuinely and seriously just begin to ask God, what would it look like? What do you have to say about what I'm doing with extra? And we're going to come back next week and get a little bit more practical about what it looks like to be in a position and to position ourselves to become percentage givers. If you're already a percentage giver, to keep that at a place where we continue to grow that percentage. We become more generous over time, not less generous over time. Because historically, average Americans give about 6% of what they earn to charities, to whatever. That's not a Christian thing. That's just an American thing. The irony is, as people get more wealthy, that percentage doesn't go up; it goes down. And so if you ever happen to find yourself in a position where you can be rich by American standards, I would love for you to be good at being rich. And if I get that place, I would love to be good at being rich by American standards and the percentage keeping up. So wherever you're at financially, let's invite God into our finances this week. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, this is such a sticky topic and such a hard thing to look at and see in the mirror. God, greed's easy to see. And celebrities and pro athletes, it's hard to see in the mirror. And God, it's hard for me to accept that I have extra, that I have more than I need. So God, this week, will you help us to invite you into the conversation about our finances? God, will you help us to be honest with ourselves and honest with you that we have extra? God, will you speak to us about what it is you want to do in us with the resources and finances you've given us? And God, give us the wisdom to know what to do and the boldness and the courage to follow through and do it. In your name, amen. Amen. Hey, we love you guys. More importantly, God loves you. I hope this has been a helpful Sunday for you guys.